Good morning everybody and welcome back to the Morning Bible. Wonderful once again to have you. We are in Luke chapter 17 once again today. Sorry about the confusion with the titles for the last videos and the upload times. It's been a bit weird, but back to normal now, hopefully. We are going from verse 5 today in chapter 17. We've got a couple of little bits to pull through, and the second chunk is quite interesting, let's say. That's not me saying it's like bad or anything, that's just me saying this is going to be an interesting one to look at, I think, because it's quite challenging. So verse 5, it says, the apostles said to the Lord, so Jesus' followers, said to him, "Increase our faith." And Jesus said to them, and the Lord said to them, "If you had faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." And so the disciples coming up to Jesus and they're saying, "Look, increase our faith. We want more faith. We want to have loads and loads of faith. We want to be overflowing with faith." And Jesus says, "Look, if you just even have the tiniest little grain of faith, then you can do incredible miracles." And it's the classic sort of line from that, I can't remember what the song is, but like, you know, the Christian song, you know the one I'm talking about. It's like, faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. It's that kind of thing. Whereas, look, just a tiny amount of faith will do a lot. A mustard seed back in the day was sort of the smallest seed they had available to them, but yeah, it would grow into this huge tree. And so Jesus is saying, if you have just even this tiny amount of faith, then you can do great things. Because it isn't the quantity of your faith that's actually important. It isn't about having a huge volume of faith, like about having, like, I don't know, what's a bigger seed than a mustard seed? Like a sunflower seed. It isn't about, you know, if you have a sunflower seed, you can do more than if you have a mustard seed, because it isn't you doing it, the thing at the end of the day. It's about God doing things through you. It's God doing actions in the world. And so God's powers aren't sort of limited by your amount of faith, whether it's this much or this much or this much. God works in the world, and all it takes is you to have just enough faith to ask God to help and to sort of welcome him in, and God will do all the rest. So that's a good little passage. That's a really interesting little one. But now we move on to verse 7, and which is sort of a separate chunk. And this is the one that I was sort of talking about at the top of this video. So let's get into it. It says, this is Jesus talking to his disciples. He says, "Will any one of you who has a servant ploughing or keeping sheep say to him when he has come in from the field, 'Come at once and recline at the table'? Will he not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me and dress properly, and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterwards you will eat and drink'? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all the things you were commanded, say, 'We are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty.'" So, this, at first when I sort of read this passage, where the bit where it says, "Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded?" in my head I was like, yeah, you say thanks. Like, the master would say thank you to the servant. But the implication of the passage is actually no, which is quite interesting. I think this is a cultural divide, as much as anything else. This is a cultural difference that we as British sort of readers of the Bible have, that's different from how things were at the time in the Middle East. So if you had a servant do his day's work, do all the things that were required of him, and then they come in and they cook dinner and they do all the rest of it and they do their duties, there wouldn't be a social obligation to thank that person, because that person has done what was expected of them. They haven't gone above and beyond. They haven't done, you know, something extra for you. They've done what their duty was, and so there wasn't necessarily this need to thank them that we have today, where you thank someone for doing any tiny little thing for you. It was kind of a different culture there. So that's kind of partially what's going on in this passage. But yeah, so with that in mind, what is the passage saying? Well, there's a servant who's out in the fields working all day. Bear in mind that a servant, sort of in this context as well, doesn't mean sort of the kind of thing that we think of when we think of servants or slaves today. We tend to think of this as a very sort of oppressed group of people because of the East Atlantic slave trade, but actually back then if someone borrowed money from you or owed you money, then they had an option of just coming and working for you as an employee, and that money would be paid off over time as they would work for you. And it wasn't this big oppressive thing to the same extent that it became. It was more of an economic thing of just certain people worked for other people until they had paid off a debt. It sort of, stopped people from handing on debts to their children and to their children's children, etc. So a person has a servant, and the servant is ploughing the field or keeping the sheep, and then comes in. And so does the master say to them, come in at once and recline at my table? No, is the answer in this passage, which you might be expecting, oh yeah, why not? Why not invite your servant? But the point of this passage isn't about that. He says, the implied answer is no. Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterwards you will eat and drink? That is actually where the passage goes, because that is the duties of the servant. That is what is expected of the servant. The servant is expected to fulfill their duties. They don't sort of do half of the job and then have the master step in and say, oh, you can take the rest of the day off, you can just come and chill with me, we'll pretend like you don't have any more work to do. The master expects the servant to do the full job. There's no half measure, there's no half complete job. You're expected to do the entire job. And so the servant does that, and then there isn't sort of this thing of like the master should be super thankful for the servant because the servant has done what was expected of them. They've done their duty. It's this idea of duty versus, I don't know what the word is, but sort of going above and beyond. Duty is what is expected, and you don't necessarily get thanked for doing your duty because it's your duty, it's your job, that's what you're told to do. At the time you would only be thanked when you would go above and beyond, when you would do extra, when you would be generous, when you would go beyond what you were asked to do. And so Jesus is essentially saying, this is kind of like how it is when we serve God. The notes in my Bible make quite a good point about this. The question of verse 9, does he thank the servant, implies the answer no. Jesus is not, however, encouraging people to be inconsiderate or rude. Rather, it is a vivid example to illustrate the point of verse 10, namely that we are unworthy servants. Like a tax collector, and unlike a Pharisee, Christians should acknowledge that God owes them nothing, and that they owe him everything, even their very lives. So it's about having this perspective of who we are and who God is. God has come down, he's saved us, he's done all this amazing stuff for us, and he welcomes us into his kingdom, and has forgiven all of our sins. He's done so much for us. What can we possibly do in return to God? We owe God so much. And so when God asks us to go and plough the field, or do the sheep, or come in and make dinner and do the rest of it, we shouldn't be sort of grumbling about that. We shouldn't be expecting God to give us like, oh, don't worry, you've done half the job, that's good enough. We should do what God asks us to do. We should follow through with his commands and follow through to them in completion, and then not expect God to give us these huge rewards and blessings and thank yous at the end of it, because we still owe God so much more than he owes us. He doesn't owe us anything. He saved us out of choice and out of generosity. And so the balance in our relationship with God is that God has done so much for us and we owe him everything. We owe him our whole lives. And so we shouldn't try and get away with just doing half a job. We shouldn't be content just to kind of half finish things, and we shouldn't expect God to be super thankful for us doing one small thing when in comparison he's done huge things for us. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I really enjoyed getting into that passage, because first time I read that I was like, wait, what? Are we not supposed to say thank you to people? Are we not supposed to be nice to people? Are we just supposed to work our servants to the bone and all the rest of it? But actually, when you see it in this godly perspective, when you see how much we owe God and how God has no reason to sort of be generous to us and be kind to us except for the fact that he loves us, then suddenly you get this whole sense of, oh, why would we expect God to sort of be thanking us left, right and centre when we've only done the smallest thing for him? So yeah, in essence, if God asks you to do something, do it. And do it to completion. Don't do Don't do a half job. That is today's lesson. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. That was a good one. I learned a lot from that one, and hopefully you've learned a little bit too. And I will see you all tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye bye.